On 8th April 2026, Government of India released a press statement which said that on 29 July 2025, 51.5% of India's electricity production was done from renewable sources. I think that's a big achievement. But what has this got to do with an EV channel? I will explain you in a bit. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode on the Green and Clean YouTube channel. My name is Vittal. One of the common things that EV naysayers say about EV usage is that the electricity grid is not clean. We still take a lot of coal and fossil fuels to generate electricity, and that is true. If you remember, I have covered an episode 2 years back on comparing pollution levels for EVs versus ICE, considering about 70 to 75% of electricity production is from coal and fossil fuels. And in that episode, as you have seen, EVs still pollute less than any other alternatives that are there. So in that episode, I think I might have said that in the years to come, the electricity grid will be greener and greener, and we will have less CO2 emissions. And 2 years later, or maybe roughly about 2 years later, it's time to relook at those numbers. And I'm very glad with what has happened today, where India is able to achieve at least 50% production from renewable resources, at least for a day in a year. On this channel, I try to bring you some insightful content about EVs. I try to be as balanced as possible, but I end up being a pro EV guy, but that's the reality. And if you like such content, a kind request to like, subscribe to the channel and share these videos. I will read out some numbers from that report, and if possible, I'll put it on the screen for you to read out as well. But let me read out the points that I made. So in that press release, it is said that India has achieved 50% installed capacity from renewables. Yes, 50% of India's installed electricity capacity is from renewables, and this is achieved 5 years ahead of time. We were supposed to achieve it in 2030, but we have already achieved it at the beginning of 2026. So that's big. India's installation capacity is already 50% from renewable energies. To be precise, 250 gigawatt of installed capacity is from solar and other renewable energies, and India is the third in the world behind China and USA in terms of capacity from renewable energy. But the 50% installed capacity from renewables doesn't mean that the 50% production of electricity is from renewables, because obviously solar, you cannot have 24/7 generation. It is probably about 8 or 10 hours a day. Wind is inconsistent. Hydro power is again seasonal. So despite having 50% installed capacity, probably we are only able to achieve 25 to 30% of electricity production through renewables. But the fact that one day in a year, last year, we could achieve 50% production from renewables gives me a hope that someday we will achieve much more consistent 50% electricity production from renewables. Let me read out some reality. So as of year 25-26, coal production, electricity from coal still accounts for about 67.7%. So that's still huge. Total fossil fuel contributes to about 70.8% of electricity generation. But the thing is, year on year, we have reduced coal by about 3.6%. We have reduced gas by about 17%, and other fossil fuels we have reduced considerably. So as a result, the contribution of fossil fuel in India's electricity generation has gone down by about 4 to 5%, which is a good achievement in 1 year. On the other hand, electricity generation from non-fossil fuel is about 29.2%. And the good thing is, every year or this year, we have increased wind capacity by 20%, 27%, solar capacity by about 20%, biogas about 6%, hydro by about 12%. So this has resulted in non-fossil fuels increase in production by about 15%. So on one side, we are reducing the fossil fuel contribution to electricity generation by about 4 to 5%, whereas non-fossil fuel we are increasing by close to 15%. So out of 51% installation capacity, solar constitutes for about 44 gigawatt of installation, wind constitutes 30 gigawatt, and hydro again adds another 30 gigawatt of production. Now comes the interesting fact. I will share this application. As you know, for 15 years of a car's life, for about 3 lakh kilometers, I have done an ICE versus EV in terms of CO2 emissions. As you can see in the graphics here, for 15 years and 3 lakh kilometers, the ICE car would emit about 65 tons of CO2 throughout its life cycle, that is manufacturing plus running of the car. Whereas if you have EV, which is charged from the electricity grid today, which is about 70 to 75% from coal, EV will emit about 50 tons of CO2 emissions. So even with the polluted grid, EVs are reducing the pollution of EVs are reducing CO2 pollution by about 30%. And if you go solar, it's much less. So it is just 15 tons of CO2 emissions throughout the life of this car. Now, let's imagine that grid gets more cleaner in the years to come. So if we achieve 50% production through renewables, 50% electricity production through renewables, then we are looking at a slightly different number. So 15 years, 3 lakh kilometers on an ICE car would still emit about 65 tons of CO2. Whereas if the grid is pure, is 50% from renewables, then the emission from EVs will come down to 40 tons. So there will be a further 10 tons of less CO2 emissions through the life cycle of EV cars. And if it is solar, it will still remain at 15 tons. So that's the effect of switching to EV and making the grid cleaner and cleaner. And that is the gist of today's episode. I'm glad that 2 years later I made that first episode. I'm able to make this episode just to prove that as the grid is getting cleaner and cleaner, the total emissions, CO2 emissions by EVs through their life cycle is also getting less and less, and that's the point of about EVs. Now, this episode may not go well with those people who are in the coal business or petrol industry, etc., etc., but that's how things goes historically. We had horse carriages, and the people who were running this horses and horse carriage business went out of business because the engine cars came, and now it's the next phase. From engine we are going to EVs. That's the thing in any walk of life. Even in the software industry, AI is taking over the software engineer's job, but there's nothing to worry. We as human beings, we will find other ways of leading our life. We will find other ways of uh, earning, and etc., etc. So we cannot stop an industrial revolution from happening just because there is an interest in our business. So that's the message I wanted to say with today's episode. Well, thanks a lot for watching another episode on the Green and Clean YouTube channel. See you again in some time. Thank you.